when you guys were in negotiation or when this started, we could have maybe had a presentation then or be informed what we can expect, or even prior to coming into the Senate meeting to know the full extent. And as opposed to resorting to politics, we just have questions, and I think the Belizean people also do. $50-something million is not little money. I also want to also agree that the Belizean people are, I know in San Pedro we're facing scheduled load shedding, so our electricity is under pressure, and so in a sense there is some sense of wanting this to happen for the greater good of Belize. But again, I don't know to the full extent, because this is being rushed. Ownership cannot come in this fashion. I think ownership must come with accountability. And again, as much as you guys must stress about transparency, I don't buy into it. I will go with what the lead senator stated. We cannot accept this. I cannot accept this, and I will put it on record. Not because I don't agree in what this could possibly mean for Belize, especially when we talk about electricity, but because we do not know the full extent. There's many questions. At this point, politicizing it does not answer the questions. And so, Mr. President, that is my contributions for today. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chinona.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Madam President, with your leave, I would also add to your note earlier today at the start of the meeting regarding our colleague, Speaker Woods, and adding that we certainly join with all survivors and all fighters of cancer as they continue their struggle there, but certainly seeing her ring that bell lifted everyone's spirits. I also, Madam President, with your leave, would want to note the absolute tragedy that is the gender-based violence that continues to impact our society. The news overnight of a mother and her child burning to death at the hands of someone she once trusted is not only abhorrent, but we're talking a lot today about resources. And goodness knows what we've lost in the potential of that mother. We say her name, Miguelita Chan, and her young son, Tishan Godoy. And I just note that I think that's one more call, as if we needed it, but one more call that we really need to look at gender-based violence in a way that is going to be catalyst for change rather than just recording one case to the next. Madam President, I want to start my contribution on this bill by noting, I think, my personal appreciation for what I would call unique insight to this. I think, and I say this with pride for my fellow Belizeans, I think we are a people that once we start to get into a subject, we become experts in that subject. Maybe not always by degrees, but we certainly do so on keyboards. So when hurricane season starts, we're all meteorologists and so forth. But I think it's an excellent outcome of this acquisition that so many more Belizeans will be invested in energy and what it is to this country, not as a luxury certainly, but as an essential service. And with your permission, Madam President, I don't know the gentleman, but on Wednesday, October 15th, I saw an article posted, and I thought, wow, this person is really informed. But what he shared was really resonating, and I say that not just as a consumer of electricity, but also as a member of the board of Belize Electricity Limited. I was nominated to be one of the directors of Fortis in July 2022, and I took my position there since August 22, and according to the law, became a BL director. I say that very specifically for any clarity in terms of any concerns about conflict of interest, because they have never, and I would never have remained, sought to have any kind of direction or influence on my contributions there. I was and remain until this situation is closed, a director for BEL. But I started out saying that the unique insight, because as this gentleman, and with your leave, I'll quote from that article, but this gentleman really summarized several of the points that resonated, and I don't know who the author is, Madam President. The article is posted under the name Horace Palacio, but what he shared was really, I think, bringing to home one of my reactions to this purchase, which is, and I'm starting to quote now, economic studies consistently show that what matters most is not who owns the utility, but how well it is regulated. When oversight is strong, private and public operators both perform well. When oversight is weak, both fail. The World Bank's policy research suggests hybrid or public-private partnership models often achieve the best results in small economies. Governments can maintain ownership of critical infrastructure while private firms manage operations under performance-based contracts. This mix allows for investment, innovation, and accountability without giving away national control. For Belize, where the economy is small and heavily dependent on imported energy and goods, the focus should be on strong regulation, transparency, and public involvement. Utilities must balance efficiency with fairness. Prices should reflect costs, but maintain affordable for everyday Belizeans. Whether it is government or private control, the good should always be the same. The goal should always be the same. Reliable service, fair pricing, and investment in the nation's future. He closes by saying, the debate over who should run Belize's utilities is not a battle between government and business. It is a test of leadership, vision, and responsibility. In the end, what matters most is not ownership, but outcomes. And I'll close the quotation there. I start there, Madam President, because there has been, and I will leave the ownership debate in terms of public and government run to others. But I want to call out two things. And Senator Galvez and Senator Guerra and others have already raised it in terms of involvement. Because at the outlooking in, and this is on public record from the chair and others, in terms of what has been at play in terms of the cost of electricity. And I have spoken in other fora about the reality, and I have changed climate change to climate crisis, because I really think that's the terminology that's more appropriate to the realities that we're facing existentially. But it's really and truly that we have to know what that cost is. And in Belize, it has come down a lot to regulations. And I'm grateful to Senator Koyi and his colleagues, Mr. Espat and Ambassador Young, for hosting a information session with us the same day, the 15th, which I thought this author is really well informed, because he's referencing material even the senators haven't seen, and certainly I hadn't even seen as a director. But just to say that it was critical that the awareness of how these prices are arrived at, the cost of power and what it is, and what that has translated to in terms of the light bill, and whether you could put up your Christmas tree or turn on your AC and not feel like you have to, as Pastor Wade said, cost yourself or compromise other things. Because if we don't know how that price is arrived at, as Ambassador Lynn Young called out at that session, how do we keep ourselves accountable that since 2011 we have not been able to add a source of generation of power in this country? And as Senator Herrera called out, it really lands at the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, the regulator, and how do we reconcile to the Belizean people that if additional generation sources were in play, were on board, and I'll note that some of the same, I will call them value-added initiatives that will come on even to the hydro facilities, the floating solar farm, those were things that were submitted but never approved for one reason or the next. So I personally look forward to more questions being asked, more answers, generating more questions so that everybody can be informed, because while I think there is this relative perception that electricity rates are high, I think once you get into the numbers, you will see it could look a lot worse. And Senator Koyi has already shared with us that a tariff review is going to happen to see where things are going to land. And I think that's going to be important so that in terms of the outcomes of this, as I think Senator Wade was trying to say, that where everybody's hoping for cheaper power, then if we can understand whether it's through cost-benefit analysis, whether it's looking at how proposals are reviewed, how tariff reviews are conducted, looking at the national scope that other utilities are also putting in for a tariff, and understanding the national context to this, so that we can plan, so that we can look at what's coming, and so that, as has been called out, we can keep to our commitment, as Senator Galvez eloquently put it, our flagship renewable energy sources, and that we can keep to this set of generation and feel good that we know what we're doing and how we're doing it and how we're going to get there. And I caution to underscore, and I believe Senator Farber quoted from the summary, while we're there counting, or I don't want to say counting chickens, but we're counting profits in terms of what is to come into the economy, I really, really and truly need to underscore how critically important it will be to protect the watersheds that feed those dams. Because I think the term at the information session was environmental issues. But there was a call, and I was a journalist then, interviewing San Marshall about what the environmental impact was when those dams opened. And I would just want to underscore that it is not just about the river and whether the river is decreasing, but it is also about what are we doing to the watersheds feeding those rivers, and what it is that we're doing around that entire space along the river for those 3 hydro facilities that actually have a compounding and cascading impact on what is in the river at any point of the year. Because again, in terms of the climate crisis and that predictability, we should not be part of compounding the issues that are already facing a run-of-the-river dam, and looking at how we are enhancing and strengthening the ability of the ecosystem to serve. And I say that not just from a energy security move, but also from a water security move. How many times has FCD and Mr. Rafael Manzanero called out to this country that from the Chicky Bull, we get 60% of our water, 60%. And yet we have development in there, we have illegal activities in there that compromises that. So alongside with focusing laser in terms of the acquisition and the outcomes related to the acquisition, I would truly hope that this also causes a laser focus into the things that we need. That's the one thing that the human body literally cannot do without. And that's why the rising heat is so detrimental from a health perspective to the human body, because Senator Wade talks about having to put on the AC, and that should be something that every Belizean should get. And I hear him. That's what's happening in India, where they have 40 and 50 degrees Celsius temperatures, and their bodies are literally baking, boiling, because they can't cool down in the night as the human body typically tends to do. And what that has done is increase their demand on the grid, and the grid collapses in the same way. There are things, and we have spoken about this, there are things that we can do even in our construction to help to bring down the heat and the impact to that. But I say all of that to emphasize that it has to be that we're looking at that holistically, that we're looking at that within an ecosystem and not seeing this as some type of isolated thing. The dam is either functioning or not. And I want to align also with something Senator Senator Guerra called out in terms of the dams being maintained to international standard, and aligning myself with the inference that that means that we do have opportunity to strengthen our local laws and regulations to make sure that in terms of maintenance and looking at all the, again, corresponding things that we can be doing for the environment and around protection and maintaining, whether it's OSH standards or other things, that we can be looking at strengthening and bringing that up. Because as any Google search or AI will tell you, maintenance of the dam is what determines whether the dam will last 30 years, 50 years, or 100 years. So that corresponding impact of maintenance. And last but not least, I think also that alongside that of making sure that training is there and that opportunity for those Belizeans, and expanding that so that there is that national play in that dynamic as well. I remember my first opportunity to visit the Panama Canal, and just that pride of everybody on that canal is a Panamanian. That was the one thing when they took over that canal, that was one of the first things that they said, you have to be a Panamanian. So as we move forward with, I think the term is Belizeanization, that looking at those outcomes and coming up with those outcomes and making sure that we're on track for that, because otherwise we're expecting things that it can't deliver. So I would just close, Madam President, with saying that I also fully align myself with the call of getting as much disclosure and transparency, and I said all the studies and the feasibility. Senator Courtney mentioned start of Diwali today, and echoing that, but also looking at what Diwali means. It's light over darkness and knowledge over ignorance. And I think if it is that Belizean people need more information to feel comfortable and to get on board and to increase their involvement, then why not? So I look forward to that being something that is shared so that everybody who needs to feel comfort can do that. Everybody who needs to be informed about maybe the things that will get a little bit worse or a little bit harder before they get better, that they can be prepared and they can plan and move accordingly so that we can make this the outcome or the set of outcomes we need. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Sheena Pitts.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may be permitted to join your good self and Senator Chanona in recognizing Cancer Awareness and Cancer Month, and congratulating Speaker Woods on her completion. And I was here thinking, looking back at our two previous motions on our loans and Senator Chanona's reference to gender-based violence, and acknowledging, recognizing that the ministry responsible for those two is the Ministry of Finance. And I take this opportunity to say, my good sir, Senator Cowie, the confines. Oh, goodness gracious. Well, men, I have even less optimism. But I say that somehow, someone who still somehow has talent in them in that ministry, that the confines of the lone motion that is directed to empowering women, that somehow in it extends itself to addressing assistance to women in gender-based violence situation. And the last, I would crave your indulgence to permit me joining with Senator Cowie and Senator Chanona in wishing our Indian Belizeans, Courtney, you know I make this happens to me, eh? Our Indian Belizeans, happy Shub Diwali. I do no favor at all, you know, so I don't know why I do that. No disrespect, gentlemen. It's not unparliamentary. So, and the light you speak of, Senator Chanona, when is it are we to have the light? Shouldn't it be before we buy the light than after we don't buy the light? Because you see your call that says the light that is Shub Diwali. We look forward to the remaining information, inquiries, and answers. It is our position that it should have come before this document was executed. And you see the irony of this, and it always provides that knee-jerk reaction to me, Madam President, because this administration, the last term and now, commit themselves and undertook to good governance, transparency, and accountability. But here we are looking at a bill, and when you go to Section 11, it says, this act shall come into force on the 21st day of October 2025. Madam President, whether we may agree, not agree, or sit there 6 over there, majority may prevail, because it has to go into force tomorrow. And how is it, I ask? Well, you know, let me say, Madam President, I can say, and this is not imputing any improper motives, but I can say I am happy in this moment that I don't invite any consideration that anyone has to consider that by virtue of me being a board member or by virtue of my small firm representing any of the parties, that you don't have to worry about conflict of interest. No, but my one small, right? Why not get no ends on those things? So I am comfortable and happy for that. And it should never be that we should put ourselves in a position where we have to defend our integrity, because I take it for granted that that bespeaks us, and I know Senator Courtney will agree, it bespeaks you. This session that was held, that I hear you reference, Senator Chanona, you know, it made me wonder, where were we? Weren't we invited? I would have loved to go, because you see, when we are provided the information, invited to these things, I, for one, it makes it so much easier to know that I have enough information at my disposal that will take away from whatever presentation I have to make here today. But I didn't have that benefit. And thankfully, we got the report by Suknandan, because that was necessarily helpful, and it crippled the lower house. And I wonder, how is it, as lawmakers in this country, we are passing things where it's one thing for people to have the information and don't read and don't come here and get up and talk, you know. But it's another thing for people to just not have it. And it can't be that we are dealing with these things with our chambers just not having the information. Man, the way you give glowing commendations to the government, it would seem you know everything. Now, let me go to the bill, Madam President. let me make it clear. The opposition is not against nationalizing any utility. That is not our position. We are for nationalizing utility. Man, if we can remember, it is the Barrow administration that put in constitutional safeguards for our national or utilities. I think, as I understand it, and having looked at the documents, the issues that are arising is the manner in which the sale was done and the way in which disclosure happened, the obligation and the responsibility of the government to ensure that in taking on this noble endeavor, that paramount is the interest of the Belizean people to see such an endeavor translate into the dollars and cents of the Belizean people's pockets. So that, I would say, is a summary of my approach to the deal. When looking at the agreement, one of the first things I hear the government saying, it's a good deal, it's saving money. But also in the documents, there are clauses that says, and let me read section 10 subsection B, 10B of the bill. Not, and permit me to read, Madam President, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in the Income and Business Tax Act, the Exchange Control Regulations Act, and regulations made thereunder, the Stamp Duties Act, or any other law, rule, regulation, order, or instrument whatsoever, upon divestment of any of the FBL shares or the BEL shares or any portion thereof, any such transfer by the government to any member of the public shall be exempt from stamp duty, and any dividends declared and or distributed by or any interest paid on any securities issued by FBL or BEL, as the case may be, shall be exempt from any income, business, or withholding taxes.
First shaft to the Belizean.
Into perpetuity. Now, let's look at it in a balanced way. The government is saying they have nationalized for the benefit of Belizeans. So when they nationalize, they're immediately divesting shares as well as setting up a 3-member body, Ambassador Lin Young, to whom we can afford no criticism, Nadia Garcia, I will not repeat the last part of my statement, and Mr. Joe Wade. I can associate myself with the first part of my statement. And they will be responsible for divesting the dams. And I can't say, and I look forward to you clarifying who from the government. I say it is such a disappointment that the one talented Senator Koi is leaving the Ministry of Finance, but who on the government will lead or participate or advise in the divesting of the shares to the public?
Newser.
Yeah, we need a newser if there is any. But who a landman? So we have these two things, the divesting of the shares and the dams. And it is for the public. I looked in the act to see whether or not public was defined, and you would want to take it for granted it means public at large, but is it public at large in Belize or public at large anybody? And I asked myself, I had to acknowledge that perhaps when Senator Courtney is not taking all the legal briefs in the country, because I am able to still work and earn a living, I may possibly be one of the persons who could buy 1 or 10 or 20 shares. But Senator Koi, if there is any group of persons getting together, forming any company to buy, tag me in, no? I don't know that I can say that for the ordinary Belizeans. So you see this statement that it is for Belizeans and being put to the public? Which Belizean has disposable income at a time of inflation and high cost of living to take money from salaries where they barely afford one livable wage and buy in back to BEL? Well, the hydro, the new name, no? Which average Belizean? And so I don't want us to stand here and preach and laud government as if though this is truly for the average Belizean citizen. And Senator Faber made reference to speculative trading. I will get to that and explain a bit why that is a concern. Because there are only a small number of Belizeans who can get up and say, I will buy into that design. So is it that the government telling me that, or making me realize that I don't know the average Belizean for which they transact on my behalf? And is that the realization for the average Belizean that when this transaction they have to come to face with it, it's just said to be on their behalf, but not felt to be on their behalf? Madam President, please permit me to perhaps take a minute or two off of Senator Courtney's summing up. I heard Senator Dennison ask, why we buy this now for? What was the need for buying it? Why no? And I join with Senator Galvez when she, according to what we've been told, correctly pointed out the reason, which was Fortis removing its interest in the region and getting out of business. And Senator Courtney said the three main objectives, and correct me, Senator Courtney, stem outflow of foreign dollars, terminate clause causing increase in cost, and give the opportunity to participate in equity and debt market by Belizeans. So that is not a secret. The government has said that is the impetus to which they have entered into this agreement. I tell you, Uganda, the sessions I didn't, so I don't know any other reason other than the one provided by Senator Courtney and those that accompany the documents. So I can't say those are the reasons and I accept them. Because at the end of the day, what those reasons have caused is that Belize, the government, has put itself in prime position to take the first opportunity to nationalize. In relation to and I've dealt with the offering of the shares and the divesting of the dams before. Let me move on. In relation to the debate on the dams and the report from Mr. Suknandan. You know, Honorable President, two things can exist at the same time, two competing truths. And what is true and correct and in the report is, as Senator Faber has said, on the state and the condition of the dams. That is what is in the report. Now, what is clear to me is that Senator Guerra has not appreciated the distinction between the condition of the dam and the functionality of the dam. One may inform the other. And unless you want to conclude that Suknandan was just crazy and contradicting himself in the report, the truth is the report gave us insight into the condition of the dam. And to go even further, Madam President, I received by way of interested Belizeans pictures showing me what the dams look like. And so I cannot fall into the same trap of reading one side of the page that says it functions at this and this and it, and not appreciate the other part of the report that gives clear, uncontrovertible statements that the condition of the dam is poor. What does that have to do with the bigger picture? What is there corollary attendant to or envisaged in the agreement by the government to address the cost of not only keeping the dams functionable, but ensuring that the condition of the dams does not deteriorate to the point where it affects the production of electricity? What is there? When we forego all these taxes, where will the money come from to fix the dams? Should it not be a consideration? Should it not be collateral information that should be shared with us to make us know, you know what, we have everything under control, we have foresight, and we've made provisions for those things down the line? What cannot be lost, Madam President, is the noble endeavor to nationalize and the correlation between how it is felt by the Belizean people. I remember on the last occasion debating the budget, I made reference to Belizeans want to feel this low rate of inflation. We want to feel the benefit of this agreement in our pockets, because I have not heard, have not seen, have not read how this agreement will change or improve electricity supply and or rates. And those two things are important. And there is not much, if we take one point of view, there is not much we can do in terms of rates, because some things were predetermined. We have the PUC that plays an important role, which I am yet to see how a government entity will operate above board to regulate the government. And in terms of rate, Belizeans want to know, I want to know, because I too am tired of highlight bill, and I too tired of blackout with blowout appliances. And there are many Belizeans who experience power surge as a result of the blackout. And I've been told that we are looking forward to more load shedding. So it would have been helpful to see, attendant to this agreement, some treatment of energy production in the future. And I can anticipate, oh, we're not there yet. That is to come. But we are divesting the dams, which is the source of our energy production. And it is yet to be seen who will invest. And I put on record, Madam President, that when that time comes and the shares are put to public, and I think an amendment should be made to Section 3. Section 3 sub C, that says, for greater certainty, it is hereby declared that the government C is lawfully authorized to divest the FBL shares and the BL shares or any portion thereof to members of the public. I would like to add that when that happens, and it should be written into the bill, that those persons and or entities, corporate entities and their beneficiaries do not enjoy the cloak of the dark, that the public knows exactly who is investing, which corporate entity is investing, and if corporate entity, who are the directors, shareholders, who are the beneficial owners. Madam President, going to the agreement itself, the text of the agreement, the issue of foreign law and jurisdiction and waiver of sovereign immunity is cause for concern. And it's like we are in a history deja vu loop. Because, and I'm sure Senator Courtney will take the opportunity to speak of what happened before in terms of nationalization, and whether or not those criticisms are true and correct, for which I don't associate myself with. The point remains, the criticism there was that we subjected ourselves to foreign arbitration, bound by foreign arbitral awards, and in an agreement at that time they claim was secret. The truth is, Madam President, having arbitration in Miami by a 3-member ICC panel is not doing anything better than what they argued against. Waiving sovereign immunity is not doing anything better than what they argued against. This halfway transparency, this halfway bringing it to the public, I would still like to know the agreement provides that each party bear their own costs. Fortis and government. So I understand that Fortis is paying my good colleagues' firm independently out of their own pockets, but I still want to know which attorneys represent the government and how much the government is paying them for the work on this agreement. So tell me no. I never hear it and I never see it. How much did Jackie Marshall earn for advising the government, for handling the sale agreements? So you see, Madam President, we get some information, but not all. And so when Senator Chanona said, yes, we should promote inquiry that invites answers, that provokes further inquiry, and therein lies the light. I come back to my point that that light ought to have been before and not after, because this agreement has been executed. We don't have the ability to turn away from it. We have to pass it today. The act says it goes into force tomorrow. We have to make immediately available, I think, $18 million, US dollars. The finality of the awards at any arbitration is also concern for me, because those awards, the agreements say, are final. We have no right of appeal. And I hear Senator Dennison suggesting that, well, we should have no problem with that, provided we have the ability to pay Fortis and that the break is clean. I can agree that reading the documents, the break is clean. I can agree that considering they're moving the respective treasury bills and notes to accommodate the sale, we should be able to pay. But man, stranger things happen, you know, Madam President. And if I am to consider the criticisms about the last round of privatization, then we know stranger things do happen. So it doesn't give me any comfort because we can't be sure. We can't be certain. Now, there is another part of the agreement, the confidentiality clause, that gives me much concern because the agreements are limited to the strictest of confidentiality, save for those they say that may be necessary for public disclosure. Now, I don't have any faith, trust, or hope that what the government deems necessary for public disclosure will be the kind of disclosure that the public needs. Can they pick and choose what they want to tell you? You never know the full picture, and we always have to ask questions. So I fundamentally have an issue with such a confidentiality clause because it does not breed true transparency. This confidentiality is limited, and Cabinet should adopt an internal transparency protocol for reporting back to the Belizean public. Crave your indulgence, Madam President. Before I move on to the topic of questionable trading practices, the reason why I said we seem to be stuck in a deja vu history loop the BTL nationalization came with a lot of criticisms, but then we were able and privy to in real time and now seeing it in real life the former Right Honorable Dean Barrow's prophecy. As soon as the current administration got into government, it was no longer about ensuring BTL was able to secure the highest possible rates of returns. There was the divesting of BTL services to Smart. We saw that in real time. And that, we don't realize, provoked the BTL autopsy. I would say killed it. But I mean, the company is still running, we still have employees. And then now we see the rumor of a BTL fresh dead to a ban again. We hear BTL the buy over Smart. Now, what I will not do, Madam President, is say with any absolute certainty that that is true, because I acknowledge that it is a rumor. But the BTL nationalization was not. The Dean Barrow prophecy was not. And the BTL autopsy was not. And by autopsy, I mean the divesting of the services to Smart. Now look at the BEL nationalization and what I call the Johnny Briceño fallacy.
Kindly remember that the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. So if we are to refer to him in Parliament, can he be referred to as the Prime Minister?
Guided, Madam President, happily so. The Honorable Prime Minister Johnny Bersenio fallacy. Because the point is the fallacy, not the name. And the fallacy is this. We are nationalizing for and on behalf of the Belizean people. But which Belizeans? The BEL, save for the constitutional safeguards, are open to, and this is why Honorable Farber referenced it, open to reprivatization and or PPP. 'Cause we're happy, we like the PPP right now. We like public partnership. Because what can really happen, and it is not fear-mongering, Madam President, because we've seen these things happen over and over again. What can really happen is either what is already in place or what is yet to be set up are those persons, those entities which are meant to benefit from government coming before to nationalize and then to divest later on. And so my caution to the Belizean people is just that. Be on the lookout for down the line when the divestments are happening. Be on the lookout to hold the government to account, to disclose those persons and entities. Be on the lookout to ensure that this was not just a vehicle. Well, my colleague says retirement plan. That is not what I say. I'm not asking about retirement plans. The only question I have had on my mind for the past few days is the Houtif Budna. But what I want to say, Madam President, is the Belizean public need to be on the lookout so that at the very first instance, when this begin to smell, we have to together act to keep the government accountable. Because remember, this is a noble endeavor meant for us collectively, not us a few. And so, Madam President, you have heard the lead opposition senator say that he does not support this endeavor. I can easily associate myself with him. I do understand that whether I support this or not, this is a done deal. I can easily say that I will not ever suggest that it is not a good and noble move for the government to nationalize our utility. I can easily say that it is a good and noble move that after the nationalization, it should be put, truly put into Belizean hands. And Belizeans collectively, all, not a few. Leader of the opposition, the Honorable Tracy Tega Panton, in her contribution to the House of Representatives debate, said it like this: please just make sure I leave portion. That's what you say? My portion. Go to the Belizean people. truly appreciating that when Belizeans, the few, buy in, it is to the exclusion of the majority. But where is government's responsibility to ensure that that doesn't happen? And so that is what I'm saying, Madam President. In addition to accomplishing a noble cause of nationalizing our utility, comes with it the responsibility to ensure that it translates into something meaningful for Belizeans. Whether it means that we can look into renewable sources. Mind you, I did a little research and found that renewable sources of energy, the cost per kilowatt hour is less than hydro energy any day. And so it is important for the government to look farther than it knows, to know that hydroelectric power is not the only source of energy. And at a time when everybody else is tapping into renewable sources of energy. And perhaps that comes down the line. And where it comes down the line, great. Commendable. But I hope when it comes down the line and we're hearing and seeing of contracts, it's not the few again lining up to benefit. And so all I am saying, let it be truly what it is said to be for. Do not let the former Right Honorable Dean Barrow's prophecy of the BTL nationalization attach itself to this BEL nationalization. Because in real time we are here now. And in real time we can begin to hold ourselves to account to ensure that it doesn't happen. And so I would like to propose some safeguards for, is it that Senator Koi, you're no longer minister, but still part of cabinet like the good Senator Courtney? Oh my, that changed? Oh, I thought the release said even though you were stepping down, you would still be a part of cabinet? Aye. In any event, I propose some recommendation and safeguards. The formal rate waiver resolution, cabinet and us, I mean, I don't know how far we can go with this one, but we should explicitly acknowledge sovereign immunity waiver. Because the thing is about sovereign immunity and the arbitral awards, it being final, that can extend itself to our assets, you know, any assets. And I don't know that this government, and truly I don't know that any government has ever taken stock of the assets of this country. Is there any stock taking endeavor, my good Senator Courtney, that I don't know about? Do we know what all? So that down the line, well, if the good Mr. Waite knows, we're hoping that it's not a matter for secret, so that those final arbitral awards, we know what we stand to lose should it extend to our assets. Because the awards can extend itself to assets to satisfy the very awards. An insurance and asset transition plan. Immediate novation of all FBL insurance policies to GOB or BEL. when Senator Dennison opened his arms to the employees to unionize, that is not the end of it. There should be an insurance and asset transition plan.
Senator Pitts, just a note, there is 5 minutes left.
Guided my good Senator President, I am in my closing. Lovely, right? Pension and Labor Compliance Review. Mandate Ministry of Labor and Social Security to manage planned terminations and employee transitions where there are such. Now we hear that the framework that is there remains, and we like that. But in the event that there are any transitions, ensure that they're seamless and nobody is at a disadvantage. Arbitration Preparedness Fund. Man, if you listen to the government, then they tell you, nos estamos Jesus Cristo. We know we not have no need for go to any arbitration and pay any arbitral awards. But let's just say they are not Jesus Christ, and we do go to the ICC. There should be an arbitration preparedness fund. And I mentioned the asset protection framework. Do we have any overseas assets? It occurred to me, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. But cataloging state assets vulnerable to enforcement. And I say this cautiously, create legal ring fencing measures. Because, I mean, the agreement don't sign, you don't want to be seen doing anything untoward. But tying into my statement on a stock taking of the assets is not only to do it, but let it be known. Belizeans deserve a right to know the extent of the patrimony from north to south, east to west. Public reporting mechanism. Require annual cabinet brief on operational, financial, and legal status and of BEL and FBL for transparency. And the reason why I say that is the concern I took with the confidentiality agreement and how it limits public disclosure to what they can properly determine what is public interest and what is not public interest. I conclude the agreement of the 2025 Fortis divestment package, no doubt at this moment, restores full national control of the electricity system, but it introduces significant legal and sovereign risks due to foreign governing law, arbitration abroad, and waiver of immunity. With the proper risk management, including explicit cabinet acknowledgement, insurance continuity, and legal readiness, these agreements can yield strategic long-term benefits for energy independence and public accountability. So, until those things, I say, can happen or has happened, I don't find that we're at any state, Senator Chanona, to see any light. And I am hoping with the current state of affairs, we don't experience any interruption of light. Because the one thing I wanted to feel sure of is that this agreement could translate itself into meaning stable, consistent provision of energy at a lower rate to the Belizean people. I am not in a position to say that that is what this agreement represents at this point. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Linsford Castillo.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise, of course, to give my full and complete and unwavering support to this, the Belize Electricity Investment Bill 2025. Madam President, I would like to first ask your permission to refer to my notes. But before I do that, I would like to quickly refer to the technical inspection of the Moyehon Chalio and Vaca hydroelectric facilities, Belize, prepared by the Sukdandan Consulting LLC. Because I was wondering for a minute if the members on the other side had a copy of this technical inspection. Because based on what I heard, especially from Senator Farber, I had to wonder. Because to add to what Senator Guerra already articulated in his presentation, and if somebody may listen to Senator Farber's presentation this morning and turn off the radio or the TV, they would have left they would have been misinformed grossly. So I have to take this opportunity to read for the record what the asset life outlook, and specifically we are referring, just as what Senator Guerra mentioned in his presentation, we're referring to 3 dams, as mentioned before, Moyehon, Vaca, Chalio, and we're referring to 30% of Fortis's share in BL. But specifically looking at the dam, this is what the inspection report tells us. And I read, with ongoing routine maintenance, planned overhauls, and effective environmental management and civil components are expected to have 40 to 60 years of remaining life. You hear that? Because when I listened to Senator Farber this morning, he would have sway make you think that you'd buy, like we say in a Creole, pussy in a bag. Like these assets, right, Senator Guerra, like the assets are run down. Nothing good. Which is like a complete misinformation to the Belizean people. While life support of 40 to 60 years, we're looking at my birthday tomorrow, 40 years from now, I am 94. I'm not sure if I'll still around, Madam President. Thank you very much. But I'm just trying to show that these assets are in very good condition. The mechanical systems, which are the turbines and the penstocks, 20 to 40 years of life remaining in them, at least we're looking at. And the electrical systems, 15 to 20 years. These are not my figures. These are from the professionals who did the assessment of these assets. So I just had to point out those facts before I begin my presentation, Madam President, in order to correctly inform the Belizean people as far as what this government is prepared to do. So, Madam President, this bill authorizes the government of Belize to complete the acquisition of shares held by Fortis Energy Cayman Inc., Fortis Cayman Inc., and to consolidate Belizean ownership of the nation's primary electricity provider, the Belize Electricity Limited, known as BEL, and its parent company, Fortis Belize Limited. And it lays out the framework for how these shares may later be offered to the public, ensuring that this investment will become a shared national asset. I must also point out, Madam President, especially after listening to Senator Cetina, and I was surprised to hear his remarks, because after my colleague Senator Galvez eloquently pointed out that this situation that the government and this nation finds itself in, we did not go to seek out this situation. On the contrary, it presented itself to us, because whether we were interested or not, as has been stated over and over in various presentations today, Fortis is and has been divesting its asset not only in Belize, but in the entire region. So, whether the government was interested or not, they would have still sold their interests in Belize, along with what they're doing in other areas, I think Turks and Caicos and somewhere else. So, the government sees this as an opportunity to have our energy assets being fully Belizean owned. And who can disagree with that, Madam President? Who? I can't, for the life of me, understand anybody that would oppose this situation. So, Madam President, by approving this legislation, we are reclaiming a critical national asset and affirming that essential public utilities must serve the Belizean people first and foremost. And so, as Senator Herrera in his presentation articulated and explained to us, that to meet these obligations responsibly, the bill authorizes the issuance of treasury bills and treasury notes, and he explained the difference between these two. This ensures that the government has the legal and fiscal flexibility, Madam President, to complete this acquisition without disrupting other national priorities or causing undue strain on public finances. And that is what we mean by being responsible, by conducting these transactions in a responsible manner, Madam President. So, Madam President, it is important to note that this bill does not simply authorize government to buy. It's bigger than that. It also creates a framework for how government may later divest shares to the Belizean public in an orderly and equitable fashion, Madam President. This provision is vital. It ensures that the Belizean people will never bear the loss of undervalued sales or politically motivated disposals, as we have heard the other side caution on. It safeguards the integrity of the transaction and ensures that if and when shares are offered to the public, they are offered at fair and transparent terms. Madam President, the benefits of this bill go far and beyond BEL, Fortis, etc., etc. The real benefits by nationalizing this very important asset are the Belizean people, Madam President, and I cannot overemphasize that enough. By returning BL's ownership to Belizean hands, we will ensure three things, Madam President. We will ensure that dividends and profits remain within the hands of Belize and Belizeans. We will ensure that investment decisions are made in alignment with national energy policy. We will be able to dictate our own terms, Madam President, which is key. And finally, we will be able to ensure that tariff setting continues to reflect the needs and the realities of Belizean consumers. I listened to Pastor Wade talk about the whole turning on his air condition, and others reflected on the current cost of electricity. All these things we will be able to control and regulate, Madam President. This transaction therefore serves not only economic goals, Madam President, but also social justice and national empowerment. It ensures that the Belizean people, through this government, through their government, are the ultimate owners and steward of this essential utility. And that is what is important, and we have to keep at the forefront of this discussion, Madam President. Madam President, let's look at the whole issue of transparency, accountability, all the buzzwords that we hear over and over. But it is equally important to emphasize this bill's commitment to the very thing, the very buzzword of transparency and accountability. And I listened with great dismay and disappointment this morning at Senator Faber, who scold this side and talk about the fact that this thing is being rushed and not sufficient time was given to this process, and they're being kept out of certain things, and the reading of the haste in terms of the passing of this bill through the lower house in what we're doing today in this honorable Senate. And I said to myself, Madam President, these are the same Senator Faber way. Now, me once the Deputy Prime Minister. You do? I had to wonder, because for 13 years they sat in government. And if I'm not mistaken, Senator Courtney, I think the UDP holds the record for passing bills, rush it through on the same day as they, right? And in fact, I don't have the number, but I am sure that they are the record holder when it comes to passing bills through the House the same day. When it comes to one particular utility, Madam President, talking about rush, we all can remember the manner in which the BTL transaction was handled under the Barrow administration. Talking about doing business in a hotel room in Miami, then bring it and rushing it through both houses, and you will sit there and try to lecture us about handling a situation, in this case where time frame is important. These are negotiations that are undergoing, that the government has to make a decision, and that is what we're doing. So don't sit and try to lecture us about rushing anything through this house, because you guys over there don't have the moral authority to tell us about rushing anything. Madam President, in fact, one more example. In 2015, when the UDP settled this same Fortis transaction that we are discussing here, after 4 years of expensive litigation, you know, Madam President, the UDP government, what they did, this is 10 years ago they talked about, you know, 10 years ago, 2015, they held a cabinet meeting. They decided what they decided there. They called a special house meeting, and they rushed that bill through the house. And he, Senator Faber, sat right there. Had no problem. You can't scold Dean Barrow. You can't tell our boss, why they rush this thing here? Make we take with time. Or using those same words that he said, used this morning. You never do that. It was all right then. All of a sudden, be all right then. But now he wants to come here and pontificate about rushing things through the house. Madam President, we have to be better than that. And so, this acquisition process will be subject to all relevant financial oversight. I want him to know, including audit by the Auditor General and reporting through the Ministry of Finance. The terms of the share purchase agreements will be made public, ensuring that Belizeans understand how this government acted on their behalf. So, Madam President, this democratization, that's a big word, of ownership is one of the most progressive features of this bill, aligning with the broader vision of economic inclusion and national unity. So, Madam President, I want to really cut my presentation short, because my colleagues have mentioned quite a bit of what I had prepared. You like hear that? So, let me start to close off by looking ahead, Madam President, and state that this bill sets the stage for the next phase of Belize's energy development. A phase characterized by renewable generation, technological innovation, building on an energy system that is resilient, green, and inclusive. We can expand investment in solar, hydro, and biomass power, modernize the national grid, and continue to reduce our dependence on imported electricity. I want to reference a bit of what Senator Wade mentioned in his remarks this morning. And he also mentioned that cost of power in Belize, I'm not sure where he got his statistics from, but I won't argue with what he presented because I don't know. And the fact that Belize has the what? Second highest? Second highest in Central America. Like I said, I don't know where he get his statistics from, and I would like to know, to see for myself and to review those statistics. But I also want to reference, Senator Wade, the Carelec survey from 2024, last year, ranks Belize as the 4th lowest utility in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean. Right. And this was among 22 countries, by the way. So, we are part of the Caribbean. And so does Guyana is not an island, nor Suriname, but they are part of that survey as well. So, those are the facts. And yes, they need to continue to advocate for low electricity costs, will always be there. So, of course, we have to look at other areas to source our electricity other than hydroelectricity. And this government is in full support of that. So, Madam President, this Belize Electricity Investment Bill 2025 stands as a landmark in the history of economic governance and public ownership in Belize, and I'm proud to be a part of that. It is a bill that, one, strengthens national control over our electricity sector, two, establishes a fair and transparent mechanism for public participation in ownership, three, protects the integrity of the transaction through fiscal discipline and legal safeguard, and four, it paves the way for a more sustainable, self-reliant, and equitable energy future. I may forget to mention one more thing that Senator Farber may bring up. Because when we talk about the whole issue of who own this and who have the opportunity to invest when the time comes for divestment, and he made reference to one of the potential stakeholders, which is the credit unions along with Social Security and other entities. But I wanted to point out, and he asked me about the whole issue of member owners. At the end of the day, if my figures are right, there's about 115,000 member owners across various credit unions in this country. And when I mention credit union, who are the owners of the credit unions? It's members. That the members own the credit union, unlike the banks. It is the members that own the credit unions. And so, if one or any particular credit union decides to invest in Hydro Belize, it will be the people that will invest. It is the people's investment, so that the people will own those shares. And you can't get better than that, Senator Farber. That is the whole dynamics. Because you will have to see a return on your investment, and it is a good investment. So they will get their dividends. So, Madam President, it is a bill that reflects confidence in Belize's capacity to manage its own affairs, to invest in its own future. For these reasons, Madam President, as I mentioned when I began, I am proud to support this bill. And I am here on the other side, but in principle, that we move a step toward greater economic sovereignty, and ask that the Senate pass this bill. Madam President, I so move, and I thank you.
I recognize Senator Christopher Cowie.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, if you permit me, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of points have been raised, and I think it will involve, on my part, some level of repetition. But I think the repetition is important, given those on the other side and their interest in obfuscating the truth, obscuring the opportunity that lies before us and the Belizean people here today. This bill is, in its simplest terms, about the acquisition and the Belizeanization of the hydro assets and the shares in BEL. So let's look at that first part, that acquisition, the proposed acquisition of the hydro assets owned by Fortis Belize Limited. And let's start off with approach. I think Senator Garrett did extremely well in making his presentation and highlighting certain areas. The approach. First, in terms of the approach, if we are looking to determine whether an investment is a worthwhile, is a good investment or a great investment, we need to do our due diligence. So this opportunity is not something that had been sought out, as Senator Castillo stated. There was already the advanced negotiations in the purchase of this Fortis Belize interest, not by a Belizean company or group or Belizean public, but by a foreign investor. Clearly, they had confidence enough to invest and to want to invest in a generation company operating in Belize. And clearly the price was attractive enough for Fortis to be willing to sell. We've all had or heard the discussions about Fortis's interest and why they wanted to or were willing to sell to this government. Well, they were willing to sell to another foreign investor just the same, like how they sold their interest in the Turks and Caicos company, and in the process of selling their interest in their Cayman generation company. They have their own policy approach, but the numbers indicate where this investment stands vis-a-vis Fortis. When Fortis acquired and invested in Moyehon and Chalio back in 1999 or thereabouts, its size, its asset size was roughly $1 billion. This investment that it made out of its own equity back then was about $150 million, roughly 15% of its asset size. From then to now, Fortis has grown tremendously. Fortis's market capitalization is now over $36 billion. It's looking at selling an asset within its portfolio of worth, as it has agreed, $110 million. So it is much less of a component or a key component of its asset base. So it is a fit for them to focus more on transmission and distribution when most of their investments, most of their assets are in transmission and distribution and no longer in generation. So it's not difficult to appreciate that they would have an interest to divest their remaining generation assets. So that's on the Fortis side. Now on the Belize side, the Belize government side, is this a good deal? Well, doing due diligence, hiring NERA to do evaluation, hiring Suknandan to do the technical consulting, to provide advice, helps for the government to appreciate whether in fact they can achieve a good deal or achieve a great deal for the government and people of Belize. That approach is not any rocket science approach. That's the approach when you are looking to make an investment. Contrast that now with the approach that was done in the acquisition of BTL, or I shouldn't say acquisition, the nationalization of BTL and BEL back in 2009, 2010, 2011. What was that approach that was taken back then? Was there any due diligence that was undertaken? Was NERA hired before any acquisition process was undertaken? Of course not, because it wasn't looked at as an investment. It was a political action that was taken. No way was there the concern over value for money. And that's where everything went wrong in those transactions. When and after BTL was acquired, guess who was hired to do valuation? NERA. NERA was hired to do the valuation. And what did NERA value BTL for? NERA valued BTL for $70 million US, 140 million Belize. And what did the government of Belize end up paying? Over $610 million. So rather than achieve a discount on the value, that administration paid multiples. I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't know how I should even describe it, but to pay over 430% of the actual value of the company. It's amazing. It's unbelievable, I should say. But whereas, and that's when you don't do due diligence. That's when you don't do due diligence and
Senators,
spend other people's money.
can we be mindful of Standing Order 48B and maintain silence while the senator is speaking?
Thank you, Madam President. That's when you don't do due diligence. When you're spending, especially when you're spending other people's money, you should be more responsible in your behavior, in your action. Now we look to this transaction, and this transaction involved that process of due diligence. And in that process of due diligence, that involved legal, financial, technical due diligence. And the outcome of that due diligence resulted in a deal that was put together. I think Senator Dennison spoke to a damn deal. This isn't a damn deal. This is a power plant deal. This is a cash flow deal. These are, you don't buy a dam just to have a dam. The dam generates electricity, and the electricity generates revenues or cash flow, which creates value. It's that, and that's why you do a discounted cash flow method of valuation. It's the cash flow that gives the value to this company. So in looking at what is being purchased, it's the totality. It's the dam, it's the power plant connected to the dam, and it's the contracts associated with those power plants that provide the value to this opportunity that stands before us. And it is that value that NERA or that approach that NERA undertook in reaching a valuation of 122 million, not including the accounts receivable, 122 million. And it is that value that provided the basis upon which the government negotiated for a better than that value at ultimately 110 million as the net sale price, the net purchase price. That is the discount that has been spoken to by various senators that we have achieved as a government, that we have achieved for the benefit of the Belizean people. So there should be no loss of focus on the financial component of this transaction. But at the same time, it's only worth engaging in that transaction if the dam and the physical infrastructure are in good stead, are in good condition. I think issues have been raised over condition versus functionality. But I would say that there should be there is no one who is better equipped to consider and contemplate the condition and functionality of these dams than the consultant himself, Mr. Joseph Suknandan. He was the project manager for all three facilities when they were constructed. He was seconded from BL to the government and ultimately to Fortis as those projects, as those dams were built. So there is nobody else better than Mr. Suknandan to advise on the status, the condition, the functionality of those dams. And I think it's important to repeat what Mr. Suknandan said. You have it? I think on page 3. The conclusion, just the conclusion. Yes. Apologies, Madam President, but the conclusion of Mr. Supnandan, the one who built the projects, I said it's important to repeat it because so that there is no confusion, there's for total clarity. What the technical
Senators,
expert highlighted,
Senators.
what the technical expert
One
stated.
moment, Senator Cowie. Senator Cowie has asked that permission to repeat certain information said before for clarity, and I have a lot.
Mr. Supnandan specifically concluded that the Moyahon, Chalio, and Vaca dams are well maintained and compliant with dam safety standards. There are no major issues with the mechanical or electrical systems, and maintenance is up to date. That's the assessment. This is the conclusion. So there are exactly this is not pussy in a bag. This is a good product that's being purchased. So in conducting that due diligence, the technical due diligence indicated that the assets being purchased were in good condition. The financial due diligence indicated that the value was there, the value is there, and the value that was negotiated for is even better than what the NERA, the professional valuators, valued it at. But going through that process, that's the approach, the proper approach that was taken. Now to pay for it, looking at how this deal can be concluded, paying for it does require the raising of the capital. And once again, that process reflects the confidence that our financial system has in a transaction of this nature, but also in the government of Belize, to the extent that this transaction involves the issuance of treasury notes and treasury bills. There has been no difficulty in identifying buyers of these treasury notes or treasury bills. It represents investor confidence in the way that this government has run and continues to run its public finances. In looking at this transaction, besides the due diligence, what are those benefits that come along with that transaction of this nature? Certainly, the foreign exchange savings. As has been highlighted, one of the primary benefits of this transaction include the substantial foreign exchange savings. Whereas the initial purchase amount will be in US dollars, will constitute a capital outflow within a period of 5 years. That will be fully accounted for with the savings that will be generated by this acquisition. What that means, between 20 and 25, like I should say, for example, last year, 2024, there was 29.4 million US dollar outflow to Fortis. But even if we don't say $30 million going out every year, even if we just say $20 million going out on average per year for the next 30 to 35 years, that means between $600 and $700 million in foreign exchange savings to the country of Belize. That is certainly impactful. That is significantly impactful in what we will now have in supporting our fixed exchange rate system. We have we came out of COVID, or went through COVID very concerned about the devaluation of our currency. What does this do now? This substantially improves our foreign exchange reserves for the short, the medium, and the long term. The approach that this government has taken, I should also highlight, has positive implications from an investor confidence standpoint as well. In looking at investment as forming a part of our GDP from the 2009, 2010, 2011, when those nationalizations took place under the UDP administration. For that period from then to 2020, and comparing it with 2021 through 2024, what you see is a marked difference in investment in the country. Whereas, on average, for that period of time, we had a depressed level of investment in our country of around 16% of GDP, or around $680 million on average per year. Since this administration came in 2020, for 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024, our average investment in country, local and foreign investment in country, is in the vicinity of $1 billion, $40 million, or over 20% of our GDP. There is something to be said to approach, to how you approach investors, how you approach foreign investors in your country, how do you attract investment in your country. And I think that is very reflective of the difference in approach between the two administrations. And I think it's important to appreciate that with that level of investment, that directly contributes to the growth in our GDP, in the growth of the income per capita of each and every Belizean. Now, as to the Belizeanization. The Belizeanization speaks to the divestment. So yes, government acquires, but government acquires with a view to Belizeanize this investment. The authority is sought under the bill for that specific purpose. And with that authority, then government is in a position to divest to members of the public and to share the benefits that will accrue by virtue of this investment in the company. Recall that this transaction involves the purchase of Hydro Belize for roughly $110 million. If it is that the company continues to generate $15 million return per annum, what is the return on investment? You just 15 over 110 puts you between 13 and 14% per annum as your return on investment. Contrast that to what the opportunities, the other opportunities are that exist in Belize. Mostly with the banks, putting your monies on a term deposit with the banks, you'll most certainly get less than 3%. This is a substantial difference in returns that arises in this opportunity, and this is an opportunity for the public at large. Concerns have been raised about the different risks, and yes, there are risks, just as there is in every investment. There are risks. Climate risk is probably the most significant risk of this type of investment. The impact on rain. What is that likely to be in the foreseeable future? But in looking at that risk, looking at the trends and looking at the projections on the future, even if there were to be a 1/3 fall off in the return on investment, you're still looking at around 9 to 10% return on investment. So there is a lot of cushion there in terms of making an investment of this nature. We look at the downside in terms of those risks, but we have to also consider the upside in the potential of this that this investment has. Right before us, in fact, before the government got involved in negotiating on this transaction, there had already been discussions about building a rubber dam, essentially increasing the reservoir capacity of the Chaleo Dam. By increasing that reservoir capacity, you increase the generation capacity, which in turn enhances the revenue potential of the company, the potential for solar on the reservoir itself, but also the possibility of additional hydro upstream or downstream, or potential opportunities that exist. So we can't just look at the risks without evaluating the opportunities at the same time. So while we consider this Belizeanization, it's important to appreciate that this is an opportunity that has an upside potential besides just the downside risks. Overall, what I would like to conclude on very quickly is that this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity that has presented itself to the government of Belize. This is an opportunity that, in the way that the government of Belize has approached this opportunity, as reflected in the bill, is that this is an opportunity that will be available to the entire Belizean public. So rather than be doubters, we should consider being doers. This is what this administration has been about, being doers, not doubters. Rather than watch or watching, this administration has been about working for the people. And rather than just looking from afar and raising concerns, making complaints, I think it is time for us to seize the opportunity for the government and the people of Belize. So, Madam President, I have no hesitation in giving my full support to this bill. Thank you.
Madam President, with your permission, I would like to wind up the debate and to be as brief as I can. It occurred to me when I listened to senators opposite that it is only if you love a pedophile and support Budna and publicly come out and embrace him that you can rationalize away this
Madam President, on a point of order, it is quite uncharacteristic of Senator Courtney to go as far in his political posturing to suggest that I or any other senator on this side is in love with any pedophile. The question from me speaking on it is who thief Budna? That no have nothing to do with whether or not he's a pedophile.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I no love Budna. I not wear no T-shirt for Budna. I don't like pedophiles. I will not support pedophiles or defend them. We need, Madam President, to set the record straight. As Senator Castillo pointed out, if you listen to Senator Faber this morning, you would be under the impression that the sky is falling at Molehon, Chaleo, and Vaca. The record must reflect what it is that Mr. Suknandan actually said, and not a part of what he said. With your permission, I will read it into the record, Madam President. Mr. Suknandan said his inspections confirmed that all 3 facilities are in good operational condition with no immediate structural concerns. The low force outage rates reflect reliable performance consistent with industry standards. However, targeted maintenance is required to address minor issues and ensure longevity. That is what Mr. Suknandan said in his report. Minor issues. And then he identified the minor issues. And he addressed each one of them. He said the gravity dam and powerhouse are sound with minimal seepage and no significant abutment issues. He went on about Chaleo. He says a roller compacted concrete dam is structurally robust with minor surface erosion and spalling typical of roller compacted concrete. He continued with Vaca. The dam is in good condition with localized rock falls in the tail race and minor RCC spalling. The penstock shows leakage and corrosion posing potential risk requiring urgent inspection. The access road stability needs ongoing attention. The dam safety, emergency preparedness plans comply with the Canadian Association guidelines but require updated hydrological models and inundation mapping to reflect downstream challenges. All facilities have robust monitoring except Molehon, which lacks the piezometers due to its reservoir size. Sedimentation from deforestation, logging, and wildfire threatens reservoir efficiency. Bathymetric surveys identified sediment zones requiring regular monitoring to protect live storage. Recommendations, and he sets out the recommendations. Molehon, schedule tunnel inspection in 2026 to assess rockfall risks, install the ventilation louvers and cooling to address the heat buildup, upgrade aging electrical panels to ensure reliability. That's all that has to happen at Molehon. At Chaleo, monitor the rock compacted cement surface erosion and water stop deterioration annually. Monitor. Conduct bathymetric surveys every 5 years to track sedimentation. Vaca. Inspect the penstock leakage within 6 months and test access corrosion. Enhance tail race monitoring and consider rock bolting for stability. Generally update the environmental plans with revised hydrological models and inundation maps, implement watershed protection to mitigate sediment and deforestation, maintain access road. Senator Castillo has already read the asset life outlook for all of these facilities, and the conclusion has been repeatedly read into the record. The point of the matter, Madam President and Senators, is that as a part of the due diligence, the government hired Mr. Suknandan, who has the credentials, expertise, and experience to provide the necessary advice, and he advised the government. Let me repeat it. They are well maintained and compliant with dam safety standards. The Belizean people should not listen to Budna supporters. Listen to Mr. Suknandan. Another misrepresentation is to say to this Honorable Senate that there was no need for a decision by the government to acquire the Fortis shares. The fact is that the government was confronted with Fortis saying, we are going to sell to a foreign company. Government was required to act in the national interest. It is a deliberate decision by the government of Belize to say that if these assets are going to be sold to a foreign entity to continue the outflow of foreign exchange, to continue the automatic escalator clause, every year 1.5% increase, that we have an opportunity in the public interest to intervene and to say to Fortis, let us explore the government of Belize buying with the intention of divesting to the Belizean people. It was a necessary decision in the public interest. I listened very carefully to the Budna supporters complain about the incentives that are being offered to persons who buy shares. And you know, one would wonder if we just come from the moon or somewhere out of space. This is not the first time that there is the offer of shares to the public. It's been done in BAL, was done in BTL. There's a transparent way that it has been done and was done and will be done. This is not the first time that international companies are exiting the Caribbean. We no longer hear about First Caribbean, Heritage Biden. We no longer hear about Scotia Bank, Belize Bank Biden. This is nothing strange. It's a phenomenon that is taking place across the Caribbean and the developing world. So don't come here and pretend that there is something happening in the background, that there is some unspoken mystery about this type of transaction. This, I said pretend, man. That's what I said. Don't come here and pretend as if there is something unnecessary, something unknown that is happening here. The fact situation is, yes, man. The fact situation is that an international company is exiting the Caribbean, and came to the government, and the government said, we will intervene in the public interest. I listened, Madam President, to the criticism about the concessions, the incentives that are being offered to the Belizean people. Someone spoke about the hypocrisy. Yes? People must remember in 2015 they came to Parliament and passed a piece of legislation called the Electricity Acquisition Settlement Act. Sitting in Parliament, this is what they gave to Fortis, led by Dean Barrow and his Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Farber at the time. Extent, remember who was representing the government at that time? Who was representing the government at that time? Answer the question. Who was representing?
Senators.
Who was representing? Sitting right there, Barrow and Williams representing the government.
Senators.
And you sit down.
Don't let me have to stand. Senators, if we can be silent, kindly be reminded, Standing Order 40A, B, Senator present in the Senate during a debate shall maintain silence while another senator is speaking and shall not interrupt except in accordance with these standing orders.
Thank you, Madam President. The Fortis exemptions granted by the UDP, the Fortis companies shall be exempt from all taxes imposed on dividends and distributions paid by BEL to the Fortis shareholder, by Fortis shareholder to its parent company or its shareholders. Beyond that, the Fortis company shall be exempt from exchange control in relation to any future dividends and distributions paid by BEL to Fortis, paid by Fortis to its shareholders. Continues, the Fortis company shall be exempt from any stamp duty that would, but for this provision, be payable on the transfer of shares and the foreign exchange permits. The Fortis companies shall be exempt from any and all taxes, duties, charges, fees, imposts that, but for this provision, will be payable by the Fortis shareholder on the consideration received for the transfer of the Fortis shareholder from the government in the event that the Fortis shareholder exercises its option pursuant to the terms of the option, to the put option. Madam President, members of the Senate, what the bill says is to give even less benefits to any Belizean who buys as a part of the divestment. It is rank hypocrisy to offer that, put it in law, give it to Fortis, and now we're doing a divestment, offering it to Belizeans, and come here and say, I have a problem with it. Why? Why prefer Budna and not like the Belizeans? We have in this bill an provision that gives clear legal effect to the divestment. Clause 8. Notwithstanding the provisions of any other law, government is hereby authorized from time to time to sell any of the BL shares and FBL shares to members of the public, provided that no BEL shares or FBL shares shall be sold to the public for a price per share less than the purchase price per share under the share purchase agreements. So, Madam President, whatever they may want to conjure up about how this divestment is going to take place, I hear Lee Mark done Ghana Bank already and say how much he can buy. However much they want to conjure up all types of shenanigans, the Belizean people, by law, are protected in that no divestment can take place for a price less than government is going to pay. That is enshrined in the law to protect the Belizean people's interests. And so, Madam President, when I wind up this debate, I want to again, for the purposes of the record, associate with what Senator Denison referred to, what the Prime Minister referred to, and has been said again. Fortis Belize is managed on a day-by-day basis by 48 Belizeans. Not Fortis Canada, not Fortis Ontario, not Fortis Newfoundland, not Fortis Arizona. Belizeans. That management is going to stay in place. Those Belizeans are going to continue in their jobs. There is absolutely no reason why anyone in their right mind would want to change that management team. The bringing on board of Ambassador Lin Young is to call on his experience and expertise to guide Fortis Belize under government control on the path to transition to the divestment. Yet people come in here and have a problem with that. All of a sudden everybody loves the project now. Oh, that never me! La Budna! That never me! The point of the matter, Madam President, as has been highlighted again by senators, Fortis Belize operates in a regulated industry. There is agreements approved by the government that govern the sale of electricity from Fortis to BEL. There is one clause that is going to be changed, and that is the automatic escalator clause. That automatic escalator clause will be deleted because the government has said that it will not continue the 1.5% increase in the cost of electricity sold from Fortis Belize to Belize Electricity Limited. And that eventually, Pastor Wade, will have not as big an impact as one would want, but it certainly means that the cost of power to BEL from these dams will not continue to increase automatically on a on an annual basis. And in fact, we all agree that we have to find alternative, and that is why the solar is coming on stream for the generation of electricity. We cannot continue to rely on the expensive CFE power. Madam President, we on this side, certainly the government side, says that the Public Utilities Commission, which regulates the final price of electricity for consumers, remains in place and will have its regulatory function even after divestment. We say the public interest is protected by the guarantee minimum price for any divestment of shares. We say Fortis Belize is well managed, has been well managed, and we pay tribute to those Belizeans who have done so over the years and will continue to do so. And we believe that under the leadership of Kay Menzies and Ambassador Lin Yong, we are going to be in good hands in the months and days ahead. The valuation by NERA as to the value of that facility, the price that the government is paying is less. The put option that gives Fortis the right to get $5 per share, the government is not paying that. It is at a significant discount that these assets are being acquired in the public interest. Every right-minded Belizean, every good-thinking Belizean should support this deal. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to ratify and give effect to the FBL share purchase agreement for the acquisition of the entirety of the issued and outstanding share capital in Fortis Belize Limited by the Government of Belize and the BL share purchase agreement for the acquisition by the Government of Belize of 22,984,662 shares in Belize Electricity Limited, owned by Fortis Cayman Incorporated, to charge the Consolidated Revenue Fund with and authorize the payment of the purchase price and related sums therefrom, to authorize the Financial Secretary to make payments and to issue treasury bills and treasury notes for the purposes of financing the said acquisitions, to raise the principal sums represented by treasury bills and treasury notes outstanding at any one time, to authorize the divestment of the FBL shares and the BL shares to members of the public, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye.
Aye.
Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to ratify and give effect to the FBL shares purchase agreement and to all matters connected therewith and incidental thereto, to the Belize Electricity Investments Bill 2025.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Mr. Vice President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act Number 4 of 2023 to extend the deadline for the formalization of MSMEs and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. So, Vice President, this bill is a short bill. It's extending the time within which consultations can continue to inform MSMEs about the benefits of the Fiscal Incentives Act and to allow them to register without being penalized. It is expected that those meetings will be finished before the end of the year, and so the bill extends the period for exemption from taxation upon registration until the end of the year. So, Vice President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Act Number 4 of 2023 to extend the deadline for the formalization of MSMEs and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Aye. Those against kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Act Number 4 of 2023.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
So, Vice President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Coastal Zone Management Act, Chapter 329 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to increase the ambit and focus on the coastal and ocean governance through mechanisms such as integrated coastal zone management and marine spatial planning processes to align with international best practices, to provide for holistic integrated coastal and marine management, including the impacts of human interactions, through effective management of ecosystems within the coastal zone and ocean zones, to safeguard the integrity of the critical ecosystems, to enhance climate resilience, to promote equitable use of resources within the coastal zone and ocean of Belize, to facilitate and strengthen cross-sectoral coordination, science-based and participatory planning for informed decision-making, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Mr. Vice President, this bill comes before the Senate as part of the commitments made by the government of Belize as a part of the Blue Bond. Milestone 5 and Clause 2 of the Conservation Funding Agreement says no later than 4 years after the signing of the agreement, the National Assembly shall approve and the government shall formally sign into law and gazette the revised Coastal Zone Management Act and the ICZM plan, that is Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan, which the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan shall include a chapter on marine and coastal biodiversity offsets. It is in complying with that commitment that the bill has been drafted, shared with stakeholders. We understand that some 50 meetings have been held, 400 participants representing 15 stakeholder groups, and engagement in 17 coastal communities. Mr. Vice President, the long and short of it is that the current coastal zone legislation would be repealed and replaced with this bill, which is, as I understand it, a more modern, more integrated, more comprehensive bill than what we currently have. The purpose behind it, of course, is to support the decision by the government of Belize and the commitment made by the government of Belize to provide for up to 30% of our ocean in that and putting it into biodiversity protection. So again, it forms a part of the commitments we made under the Blue Bond, and we are facing a deadline of the 4th of November, I believe it is, 2025, to have this legislation passed.
I recognize Senator Farber.
Thank you. Mr. President, at the outset, let me say that the intent of this bill is laudable and believes does need strong legislation to guide the sustainable use of our coastal and marine resources. No one, Mr. President, on this side of the Senate disputes the urgency of protecting our reef, our mangroves, and our coastal ecosystems. They are the lifeblood of our economy, our food systems, and our cultural identity. However, the way this bill has been drafted and rushed through Parliament is cause for concern. It reflects, Mr. President, a pattern where international obligations are used to justify hurried lawmaking, leaving inadequate time for proper consultation and local adaptation. And I heard very clearly, my friend, the leader of government business, say that we have to, in fact, we heard before the leader of government business, we heard the Prime Minister say on Friday that we had to rush through all stages of the bill in the one sitting because we're under the obligation, under the Blue Bond Agreement to complete this milestone by November 5th, I think you said just now? 4th. And while we recognize, Mr. President, that our commitments under this arrangement must be fulfilled, we must never allow international contracts or debt agreements to dictate our legislative process. Also listen as the leader of government business chronicled how many consultation sessions and how many people have been consulted. Well, I will tell you that the people who you consulted do not feel the same way about your understanding of what consultation is. In fact, it is the very same persons or groups that you consulted that are now crying against the rushed manner in which you are putting this forward. It seems that when you say you consult, you call them together, you give them information, you ask them for feedback, but you take none of what they have to say into consideration in affecting how you put together the final product of the bill. And so they have grave concerns about this bill, although they believe in concept, in theory, it is needed and it is a good intention. The bill purports to establish an autonomous coastal zone management authority. Yet when we read the fine print, particularly in section 5 through 13, we see that this autonomy is more fiction than fact. There is tremendous ministerial authority, tremendous ministerial power. The minister appoints the chairman, the majority of the board of directors, and must approve the appointment of the chief executive officer. Even the authority rules, the budgets, the procedures require ministerial approval. And again, I remind my friends on the other side, the government side, that they were the ones who came. I remember this point directly from 2020. They had a session where they presented a whole motion on Plan Belize, and one of the big tenets of what they were professing was that they would reduce ministerial involvement and ministerial discretion. And here we have it again, very, very much glaring. The Barrier Reef Foundation, which can collect gifts and donations, operates under the same ministerial shadow with no independent oversight. This structure makes the authority politically dependent rather than autonomous. True autonomy, Mr. President, requires that technical decisions, particularly those affecting billion-dollar investments, land development, and environmental protection, be shielded from political interference. Otherwise, decisions about dredging, mangrove clearance, or coastal developments will remain at the mercy of political expediency rather than science-based planning. And then Section 33 shows us the weak financial oversight and transparency that is being proposed. This allows the board to appoint its own auditor with the Minister of Finance's approval. However, it does not require oversight by the Auditor General, a fundamental safeguard for accountability when public and donor funds are involved. This omission, Mr. President, opens the door to abuse, or at very minimum, the perception of it. The new Barrier Reef Foundation under Section 36 can receive grants, gifts, donations, and raise funds, yet there are no public reporting or disclosure requirements. Given the large sums that flow through conservation funding, transparency here is not optional, it is essential. We therefore urge that the bill be amended, Mr. President, in the following manner: that it require all financial statements to be audited by the Auditor General, that it mandates annual public disclosure of all funding sources, expenditures, and donations, and that it ensures compliance with international best practices in non-profit financial governance. And then, Mr. President, under Section 47, we see inadequate penalties for environmental offenses. The maximum fine for offenses is $25,000 on summary conviction or $50,000 on indictment. These fines, Mr. President, we believe to be grossly insufficient to deter major environmental violators. There's a saying that children sometimes, a saying of children that they do what they have to do and beg pardon later. Well, we might well find that that is the case for violators who want to cut mangrove and who want to pollute waterways and who want to dredge in sensitive areas. They might well decide that, well, leave 25,000, well, leave 50,000 fine, that can't hurt me. I will do what I need to do and then pay the fine when I'm done. This, Mr. President, is just too small an amount, and they are grossly inefficient to deter major environmental violators. If this legislation is to have any teeth, Mr. President, penalties must reflect the true cost of environmental destruction, not merely token sums. For example, the Environmental Protection Act allows for higher fees in certain cases. This bill should at very least, be consistent with that framework. And then there is the danger of the conflict of laws clause. Perhaps the most alarming provision is in Section 45, which reads, where there is a conflict in a provision of this act and the provision of any other law, the provision of this act shall prevail where the subject matter of the conflict is within the primary mandate of this act. In effect, this clause elevates this law above other environmental statutes such as the Environmental Protection Act, Fisheries Resource Act, or Land Utilization Act whenever there is overlap. And I noticed it didn't even say regular law. It says where there is a conflict in a provision of this act and the provision of any other law. That include the Constitution? Can't, right? But should say any other regular law then. Well, yes, it shows you the rush in which they're pushing this legislation without properly doing all the evaluation and all the checking that needs to happen. This means a new authority could override existing safeguards, effectively undermining our broader environmental protection framework. Environmental groups have warned that this is not integration, Mr. President, it's usurpation. If the goal is coherence and coordination, then laws must complement one another, not compete. This section must be removed or redrafted to ensure that the new act harmonizes with, rather than overrides, the environmental protection and fisheries frameworks. Section 24, Mr. President, mentions consultation in preparing the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan, the structure of the authority, and advisory council, and it leaves communities and grassroots organizations underrepresented. The council of 17 members under Section 21 is heavily weighted toward government officials, and there are only 2 NGO representatives and 2 private sector members who are allowed, and they are also appointed, not elected, by the authority of the minister. Talk about ministerial overkill. Belize's coastal communities from Sarteneja, Hopkins to Placencia are the frontline stewards of these ecosystems. They deserve a stronger voice in planning and monitoring. Therefore, the bill should be amended to mandate community representation and to require broad public consultation before any zoning or regulatory changes take effect. We hereby therefore make the following recommendations and calls. To make this law truly effective, the following changes are recommended: limiting ministerial control over appointments, budgets, and rulemaking to secure genuine autonomy. Secondly, to introduce conflict of interest and disclosure requirements for all the board members. Fourthly, increase penalties and enforcement powers to deter environmental damage. Fifthly, ensure harmonization with the Environmental Protection Act, Fisheries Resource Act, and related laws. And lastly, broaden community participation and ensure transparent, science-based decision-making. Mr. President, Belize's coastal and marine systems are not just environmental treasures. They are national assets that sustain our tourism, sustain our fisheries, and sustain our way of life every day. We on this side of the Senate cannot support legislation that weakens institutional independence, dilutes accountability, or centralizes ministry.
Courtney, as so far as meetings were held, presentations were made, but the bottom line is that changes were made and there was no reporting back to everyone who had been committing time and energy for more than a year in some cases to come back and say, these are the changes that were made, this is the rationale, this is how we go forward. We have absolutely no control over the timeline, none, and yet now we're in this rock and hard place that somehow we will be the bad guys for saying that we have further amendments that we would like to see. So with your leave, Mr. President, can I please read our recommendations into the record and to, yes. And for the record, Mr. President, I speak now specifically from the Belize network of NGOs in terms of timelines, but also to, as I say, reiterate that some of our members have been engaged in a much longer process, and those are also captured here, but specific to us and our members. For the record, on August 29th, we were invited by the Coastal Zone to organize a meeting of our membership for presentation of the bill. That meeting was ultimately set for 18 September. We had the presentation 18 September. It was agreed that comments would be shared the 30th of September. Those comments were sent the 30th. On the 9th of October, we wrote back saying, we submitted the comments, can we see the revised bill? That was a commitment made. Yes, as soon as the revised bill is made, we will send it. It was at that session last week, Wednesday, with Senator Koyi, and my colleagues will validate for me that when we discovered that this bill was coming to the Senate today, the Monday, the 20th, we said we have not gotten back the bill. The 15th, we requested another update in writing, and we were sent a matrix. The 16th, the new draft was sent, the 16th being Friday, the House meeting. listening to the Prime Minister say that we were, sorry? 17th, sorry, I apologize. As I said, my voice a tremble. 17th, we heard the Prime Minister say that BNN specifically was involved in legislation. We took that for what it was, and in good faith, we shared with Senator Koi our red line for our comments. I hear again in the presentation of this bill today that the outset, and it's certainly the way we went into this, that we are in full and remain in full support of meeting our milestones under the Blue Bond. That is never in doubt, never in question. And we remain for what this act ultimately would create, which is to provide for holistic, integrated coastal and marine management, to manage the impact of human interaction through effective management of ecosystems, promote equitable use within the zone and coastal zone, and to facilitate strengthening cross-sectorial coordination, science-based and participatory planning for informed decision-making. We are in full support of that. This is the context in which we read it, and I trust, as I have reiterated to everyone who has listened in advance of this, that our comments are accepted in the mode that they were prepared, which is that this is an opportunity to strengthen this bill, because we believe that is in the public's interest to do so. We all want what the bill is trying to achieve. So if you could follow with me, please, at 5, the functions and powers of the authority. We remain in support of I, in consultation with governmental agencies, non-governmental agencies, private sector, assist in the preparation of guidelines for developers and coastal zone development. We continue to believe this is an excellent approach, Mr. President, because we have seen consistently where without guidelines to developers, then they're proposing things like a helipad in the middle of a fishing spot, or development where other agencies have already said there is need to be cautious here. We want to go beyond guidelines, though. We want to make sure it's legislated so that the coastal zones can have some teeth to ensure enforceability for that. Later at L, in collaboration with appropriate, at I? Yes, we were looking at moving from guidelines to legislated policies or legislated guidelines. I don't know that guidelines are enforceable as a matter of law. I will refer to the legal experts in the room, but our guidance is guidelines are not enforceable. They are only guidelines. Legislated guidelines to give it some teeth. At L, the members pointed out that this comes across a lot like the National Integrated Water Resources Act. And we're looking at how can we look at mandating here to monitor and create monitoring plans and water quality regardless of development, because ideally environmental quality criteria to monitor and hold developers. Right now there's no criterion that assesses ecological from an ecological perspective. DOE only monitors effluents. There is no criteria otherwise. So we see L as an opportunity to make sure that there is that environmental quality criteria in place. Moving further to it would be 4 of that same section at page 12, the powers and functions of the authority. So today, for 4A, we're looking at, and I am always in favor of clarity, just to make sure that we don't give anybody any room for question, of looking at establishing a hierarchy, because what if one guidance from one entity is in direct contradiction or conflict with another department? How will the guidance be determined? And sub 4A at page 12. If you go by the page number, page 12, all right. Act as the central coordinating authority for implementation with all relevant. So it jumped out that in terms of the hierarchy. It's addressed in a subsequent section as well, but just to flag that that was something that we noticed. Same section, I, advise the minister on matters relating to. So the question there was, will the minister have to justify not going on advice related to any of these advice that are put forward in terms of spatial use and development proposals? Well, and that is the call out, that we have to make sure that there is justification. At K, maintaining a public awareness and outreach program to promote understanding of processes, objectives, and benefits. The concern was that publishing in the Gazette is not a public awareness tactic. We wanted to see if we can get the communities in a position to have access to what that public awareness. So again, just in terms of a little bit of detail in terms of where the communications material and the outreach program would be working and how. At 14, 7, sorry, page 14, 7, the board of directors. The note here is that, Mr. President, we have these multiple, I would like to see, if I had the time, I would do it, a mapping of all the roles that all our CEOs have to do by law. Because what ends up happening, Mr. President, is you have all these multiple boards, a junior gets dispatched to these meetings, it's not always the same junior, there's lack of clarity in terms of what the powers are that they vote. So in terms of the burden of time, that's one thing, but also should it be then that that person has a specific designate employee so that there's some consistency in terms of from meeting to meeting of who is attending instead. So fine if you want to leave it at chief executive officer responsible for, but then that they have an appointed alternate so that there's some consistency in terms of it. I know the minutes are there, but again, in terms of recommendation towards strengthening to make it there. At same section, H, I don't know if the chamber, the business community was consulted, but I thought perhaps it should come from a registered body in terms of representation from the private sector. And it would apply to all, but certainly that there would be a conflict of interest declaration required from all members. There was a question underlined at 2 on that same section in terms of what suitably qualified means. I don't know if that can go back to persons in good standing or some kind of expertise, certification, useful knowledge. At 10H, the recommendation for a new ground for termination would be anyone who becomes a beneficial owner of an entity with conflict. To add H, to add H. H, 10 to, just to say anyone who becomes the beneficial owner of an entity with conflict of interest issues to the responsibilities of function in terms of ground for termination. At page 20, 15C, we thought that it would strengthen things tremendously to also look at not just a public understanding and appreciation for all aspects of the ocean and related environment, but also doing some cross-ministerial within relevant and related government authorities to ensure effective implementation. Because what happens, or what we have seen happen, Mr. President, is that it becomes a protected site or a mangrove stand, but then another agency gives a permit that completely undermines that recognition or that contingency. So again, looking at streamlining to make sure that is there. At 16, and I can be guided, again, I have not had a lot of time spent with this version to compare and contrast. But at 16, I could not find where it is explicitly stated that the institute is to seek advice from the advisory council, but then I saw that in the advisory council, that the advisory council is to provide advice to the institute. So I don't know if that's captured in one of these points and I'm missing it. At M, it says advise on development and optimum utilization, but it doesn't say to whom. So I don't know if that's... At J, it says to the authority, but it doesn't say to the advisory council, where I think all the experts are relevant. For B and C of 16, we thought that it would be important to say maintain and manage at B a repository of publicly accessible peer-reviewed data via an online portal with a mandate for regular updating. At C, instead of just an information center, a publicly accessible information center. At E, consider reports of offshore solar, wind, wave, and ocean thermal energy sources submitted to the authority. We couldn't find where there was a reference in terms of who would initiate that, who would pay for that, how would that be managed, and we call that out in the context that the guidelines would be excellent towards that, because what we have seen happen now through NEAC is that the investors come in and they invest in these studies and these feasibility works, and then they say, oh, I've invested $10 million, now I need a return on my investment. You have to let me go through, but if the guidelines are there to give them the parameters or at least the locations of where what type of development is possible, then that takes away some of the issues. So it's trying to look at how do we look at, to use the word from the other side in terms of harmonization, to make sure that there is not a compromise to the development plan that's been agreed to or any protection in place while encouraging investment. The T, conduct at 22, conduct public awareness campaigns. This was changed from the version, and I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Senator Koyi on this already, but in terms of the public awareness campaign to support sustainable sports fishing. So between one version to the next, everything related to sports fishing has been excised, and that will go through to fisheries. But just to say that it is something we need to put on record, that excluding the sports fishing that was already here without consultation to the sector stakeholders, we don't think that's best practice, and it's not conducive to good faith. We understand the logic, but again, an opportunity to explain how it will work, and that the time invested does not go away, that everything that was recommended will shift over to another bill or to another amendment. At U, this again looks at how the hierarchy will be established, because we've seen where some recommendations are made, but then there's no clear determination on who's weighing it, how that decision is being made. We have no problem with a decision being made, but we feel like it should be, the recommendations should be publicized or available on public record, so that there's some clarity in who has made which decision in terms of whether there's dredging permits, mangrove clearing, ECPs, and overwater structures. There's also been this issue of, from relevant agencies, not a yes, but a no objection letter. So again, just in terms of ensuring who is making those types of decisions. At part 3 on page 24, J, we noted the, again, in terms of recommending that there be alternates or some type of system for consistency. At J, we thought it should be in this parent act, that it should be that one is from conservation and one is from private sector, so that you don't end up with 2 from conservation, or alternatively 2 from private sector. At page 27, 24B, Proposals, including existing proposals from government agencies relating to coastal and ocean zones, which deal with priority issues as identified in the integrated diagnosis. So we read this in the context of 24-1 that says that there will be within 3 years a new coastal zone plan. But the question then became, well, what will happen in the interim between now and the act goes into force and 3 years with the plan? So is there like a pause? Is there like a existing predetermination of what would be the sacred zone and what would be the sacrificial zone? So that's more an information point than an amendment there. There was also a recommendation to include the term balance in the interpretation. We have relied on the DOE's mission statement, the Department of Environment's mission statement, that when we put the environment first, development last. So how will we look at defining the word balance? And I will touch on it in my later point further, but just to say that that balance has most often than not, Mr. President, been framed as some kind of either or. We either have jobs to reduce poverty or we have the environment. We can't have both. We agree to disagree on that point. Another information point at 27(1)(a), in terms of if the non-governmental agencies are MPA managers, everyone with a legal agreement, all of the above. So perhaps it's all non-governmental agencies as well. Again, just for clarity. We also had questions at 36(1) in terms of the foundation. We know now under the NPO-NGO Act that we'd have to have an identified beneficial owner. Is that going to be the CEO? Is that the chair of the board? Since it would be a separate entity, you know, how that would work. So I guess that was more information seeking than recommendation, given that that would be relevant by that. We thought the database was excellent to establish a database, looking at, you know, seeing what all the permits and licenses and all the EIAs and all of that being readily available. There was more questions in terms of, well, at F, the economic activities, how would that be fed in terms of, you know, tourism folks and shipping, and how does that feed, and so that the population, the database can be populated with up-to-date information. At 38, it continues on the public accessibility recommendations, 38(1), looking at the authority may collect, analyze, and share via accessible means, provided that such data does not compromise national security concerns and within relevant and related privacy laws, all data, just so that there's not some perception that somehow this will not be available for public use and access. Under the miscellaneous, Mr. President, the membership takes note that in May of this year, there was a launch for an initial strategy towards industrialization of blue and green spaces policies. There was a terminology included in the official language that spoke to environmentally sustainable industrialization. We don't understand that term. Seems to be a contradiction in terms, given that most of the definitions available for modifying for industrialization looks at filling of wetlands and basically all activities at the expense of ecological health and public access. So just looking again at how do we ensure that the existing laws regenerate blue spaces and support economic activity within a structure that supports social and well-being, as well as the integrity of the site. The public awareness and ventilation, I think, is why we were hoping that this process would be something that we could look at communicating so that everybody can be comforted by this. 48(1), we recommended looking at the minister will on the recommendation of the authority make regulations, because I think the regulations will support further the Parent Act. There was a question in terms of what care means at 2A, the care, control, and management. I'm not sure if that was meant to denote conservation, but care is what's listed there. So again, Mr. President, just to say that we continue to be committed to this process to make sure that we can support reaching the milestone. We know how important it is, but placing on the record that we have tried to work within the guidelines for the timeline on this, and it's irrespective that we're here, but we have all of these, and I don't know where that leaves us in terms of making sure that at least we can ventilate our concerns and address what we can concern towards strengthening the proposed act so that it can fulfill the act itself. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. Sir.
I recognize
Mr. Vice President,
Leader.
first of all, and Senator General, do not misunderstand me. I came here with very clear instructions that consultations were held, etc., etc. A long list was sent to me. So I'm not familiar with the timings that you have indicated. It is clear to me that two things. It seems that the government and the stakeholders are committed to this legislation. If I listen to Senator Chanona and I take her at her word that there are issues that need to be addressed, it also seems clear to me that there is a commitment that we will do what is necessary to meet the deadline. My concern, I'm saying to senators, is if we amend the legislation in committee, it means it is returned to the House. The House is not having a meeting before the 4th of November, and therefore we will miss the deadline, which triggers a whole process under the Blue Bond. The situation is we either amend between now and the 4th, and it makes no difference because we will miss the deadline because the House will have to approve the amended legislation. I don't want Senator Chanona, because it is not under my sphere of influence, to say to you that we can pass now and your amendments will be taken on board. What you're talking about is an expertise that I am just not familiar with. So I don't want to say that the government representative has been in touch with me throughout, providing an answer to everything you say, but I would just be parroting it if I mention it because I don't quite understand. So we're in a difficult position and the Senate has to take a decision, Mr. Vice President. We either meet the deadline and try to fix it, or we can come back next week, make our amendments, but we're doing it fully in the knowledge that we will miss the deadline, which will trigger repercussions under the Blue Bond. My request at this stage is that we take a short adjournment or adjournment of the meeting just for 5 or 10 minutes to have a suspension of the meeting so that we can just have a discussion and we try to find a way forward.
Okay, yes, members, we will suspend the meeting and have that discussion, and then we will resume thereafter. So the meeting is suspended.
You know, I understand that my colleagues are a bit fatigued and we are trying to see the end of the day. And I will tell you, Senator Courtney, that as much as I am not one to be browbeaten, I'm inclined to take advice and instructions. And my instructions from my good lead opposition senator is that I indicate for the record, Madam President, that I do have grave concerns about this bill. And in as much as I would want to go through them line by line and be here for another maybe 45 minutes to an hour, considering that there is an opportunity, perhaps, if I am to believe the representations, which I tell you I am not so necessarily convinced, but at least there will be an opportunity to have those concerns ventilated and hereafter reflected. But I just wanted to put it on the record that there are some grave concerns coming from me on the bill. I look forward to whatever it is that will happen hereafter, and I will relieve my colleagues from being here for another 45 minutes to 15 minutes.
Madam President, after discussion with colleagues, it is agreed, and I want to put it on the record, that having regard to the concerns that have been raised, it is agreed that I will move the second reading of the bill, and hopefully it will be passed, on the undertaking that we will have a committee of the whole Senate next week to consider the proposed amendments by senators generally, not only confined to Senator Chanona and Senator Pitts, but any senator who has any proposed amendment. We will have the experts present to assist the committee in considering the proposals for amendment, which will then lead to a amendment to the Integrated Coastal and Ocean Management Bill, which is to be passed at the earliest opportunity, if not this month, next month. That is the understanding, and so I ask that the question be put.
Just for clarity, Leader of Government Business, so the amendment bill will originate from the Senate, and we have gotten support from that, from the Cabinet, or?
Well, the Cabinet hasn't seen an amendment bill. What I have said is that we will propose a bill with an amendment. Senator Chanona raised the same question, can they reject it? I gave her undertaking that if we sit here and we're advised by the expert that these are amendments that should be made, that I believe that we would be able to convince the Cabinet that they're reasonable. I mean, if Ms. Wade and the Blue Bond Committee say these should be made, I think the Cabinet will support it.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to repeal and replace the Coastal Zone Management Act, Chapter 329 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to increase the ambit and focus of the coastal and ocean governance through mechanisms such as integrated coastal zone management and marine spatial planning processes to align with international best practices, to provide for holistic integrated coastal and marine management, including the impacts of human interactions, through effective management of ecosystems within the coastal zone and ocean zones, to safeguard the integrity of critical ecosystems, to enhance climate resilience, to promote equitable use of resources within the coastal zone and ocean zone of Belize, to facilitate and strengthen cross-sectoral coordination, science-based and participatory planning for informed decision-making, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to repeal and replace the Coastal Zone Management Act, Chapter 329 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. Committee of the Whole Senate on Bills.
Honorable members, in accordance with Standing Order 68A, the Senate will now resolve itself into a Committee of the Whole Senate to consider the bills that were read a second time. Honorable members, I will now take the chair as the chairperson of the Committee of the Whole Senate. Honorable members, I now call to order the Committee of the Whole Senate. Leader of Government Business, as I understand it, we have 3 bills for the committee to consider. As I understand it, the 3 will proceed.
I move that the